Hey folks, today we're going to try to mix things up a bit, do Q&A, take a couple of questions. One is going to be about looking for sort of a secular monasticism, and the other is going to be a little bit about how I edit these videos. So we'll catch you just after the intro. Hey folks, so I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. And if you're interested in a channel that's going to help you to make the world a wiser and a kinder and a less stress-filled place, consider subscribing. We're going to have talks roughly once a week with some extras here and there about ways that we can potentially do that, looking at material from early Buddhism, from secular Buddhism, and related kinds of ideas. So I'm going to take a couple of questions today that I think might be of interest, try to get them out to a wider group of people than might read the comments below the videos. First one is from Upasika Juris, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's a little bit long, but what he's saying is what interests him is how the Buddha's path will or can develop in the modern Western world for people who want to take it more seriously, like an Anagarika, who don't want to become a monastic but want a sort of a more serious practice. And he says that the only way to seriously practice in the West is basically spend a fortune on retreats, because being homeless and begging doesn't really work in a Western context, and retreats can be expensive. And I think this is a really, really important and interesting topic. It's one that I've written about a little bit on the Secular Buddhist Association website, because I don't think that there's anything from a secular perspective that makes secular monasticism impossible. From my point of view, a secular Buddhist practice or approach to Buddhism, if you like, is basically one that sets aside issues of supernatural, that sets aside issues of a future life, whether we are reborn, whether we're not, that essentially opens up a secular space in the same way that secularism in politics opens up a secular space for diversity of religious and non-religious approaches. I think it's interesting to look at Buddhist history here. Historically, the splits, if you want to call them that, between early Theravada or pre-Theravada and Mahayana, and then later Vajrayana, the different schools of Buddhism, didn't happen because of doctrine, in the way that in Christianity splits happen because of differences of opinion about doctrine. In Buddhism, they happen because of differences of opinion about the Vinaya, or the practice, the rule book for being a monastic. So in other words, different monastics with different opinions about doctrine could remain within the same group, so long as they agreed on the monastic law or rules, regulations, basically. So long as they agreed, for example, that monastics were supposed to remain celibate, or that they were supposed to eat meals only before noon, or whatever it happened to be. Because obviously, if one group of monastics disagreed about that, then there's no way they couldn't really remain in the same organization. So in the same way, I don't think that there's anything within the monastic code that a secularist would have to disagree with. Of course, the monastic code is extremely complicated. There's a lot of stuff that we would consider baggage from a modern perspective. One that I recall Ted Meisner talking about in the past has been that you're supposed to, I think it's carry or not carry salt in a horn or something like that. But let's putting small issues aside, the main reason behind the Vinaya is the monastics were supposed to be a celibate, because the Buddha did believe that sex was an impediment to reaching the final goal. They were supposed to not handle money, because money was, again, an impediment. It tended to increase ideas of greed and so on, which I think we all understand. It's supposed to allow people to live together. It's supposed to allow them to live somewhat separate from society so that they could have a certain amount of calm time to do meditation, and it's supposed to put them in a social situation where they're being supported by the laity, given food and so on, lodging, clothing, to make up for the fact that they were not using money, but also to put them in a relationship with the laity such that they were teaching the laity the Dharma in exchange for these donations. Because the Buddha did not want there to be a complete separation between the laity and the monastics, because that would be, I think, dangerous for the Dharma in the longer term. It would turn the Dharma into something completely separate from the rest of the world, and I think that is not the way we want to take Buddhism. So none of those things are, strictly speaking, incompatible with secularism as I've defined it, and as I think we generally want to think of it in the Secular Buddhist Association. Of course, it's going to be something that's unusual. It's going to be something that most secular practitioners aren't going to be interested in. But that doesn't mean it's not for everybody, or not for anybody, I should say. The question, of course, is a social one, a practical one. Would it be possible to actually make that work within a Western context? Because it's very, very difficult, as Upasaka Joris says, to have a practice where we're not using cash and where we're essentially begging for, or somebody's begging for food. Begging is probably too strong a term, but at least expecting donations of food and clothing and everything else from the laity. Now there is, as Joris mentions, the institution, or rough institution, the idea of the Anagarika, which came up with Anagarika Dharmapala, that I described in an earlier video. I'll put a link up to it up here. So he wanted to make this kind of intermediate position between being a householder and being a monastic. And he made up this word. He didn't make up he took this word Anagarika, which means homeless in Pali, to describe this position. And this is a position where these practitioners don't just take the 5 normal precepts, but they take 8 precepts. That is to say, the normal 4 plus, instead of saying to avoid sexual misconduct, they avoid sex altogether. So in that sense, they're like monastics. They avoid eating meals after noon. They only eat 1 meal a day, I believe. They avoid, we would say, frivolous entertainment, dancing, music, I assume movies, that kind of thing, which is what monastics also do. And they avoid luxurious beds. So this is an attempt towards renunciation. So we can see that this is a pretty substantial step beyond normal householder life. But it's also not quite being a monastic, because, in particular, they still do use money. And using money means that they are not in a position of begging, they're not in a position of being supported by laity, they're not in a position of having to wonder where their next meal is coming from, and so on. But in all of these cases, there's the question of how you support yourself doing that kind of lifestyle. But I think, look, for a final answer to this, I would leave it up to the audience, to you guys. What do you think about this question? Do you think that there is a place for a secular monasticism for those small number of people who might be interested in a more serious practice? One where they weren't necessarily expending huge amounts of money on retreats at various centers, but potentially might be supported by a lay community of some kind? It would basically be, I think, a form of monasticism just like the one that we already see in Asia, except among secular believers. In other words, people with a slightly different opinion about doctrine. For my own sake, I would say I think it's possible, but unlikely, but something that I think we should keep in mind as something that might come up organically on its own. But again, what do you guys think? Now, the second question is more of a comment from Hugh M. I'll read a bit of it. He says that he likes the videos, but the frequent video cuts were incredibly distracting, though. He says that I managed the editing well, but the jittery jumps in the video became difficult to watch, and he would prefer a less tight delivery with a few ums and ahs and pauses rather than the sort of jittery video that I have. And this is also one that I really do want you guys to weigh in on. From my point of view, it's a little difficult because if I look at the analytics, it seems that, roughly speaking, people like to watch videos for about 5 minutes. I'm sure that that means that there's a large group of people who watch for 10 seconds and more people who watch for 7 or 8 minutes. But 5 seems to be kind of the heart, and I think, as I understand it, that is not unusual to me. That tends to be true with people watching YouTube videos. And the topics I take on tend to be ones of sufficient complexity that it's difficult for me to get all the information into something around 5 minutes. So mine tend to be 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes long, which is pushing things. So in order to try to combat that, I've been very aggressive in how I've edited these videos. I tend to edit out every little pause that I can find so as to compact the video and make it easier to see in a short period of time. On the other hand, that does have its drawbacks, as Hugh points out. It makes it more jittery, it makes it sometimes a little bit uneven. So, of course, for my own sake, this is something that I'm going to have to learn how to speak more fluidly so that I don't have to make as many cuts. That's going to take time on my side. But meanwhile, what do you guys think? Would you prefer a slightly longer video with more pauses and ums? Or would you just want to get the video compacted so you can watch it in as quick a time as possible if you're, in between things? And it doesn't really matter to me, but I'm just wondering what you guys think. In any event, there's a number of videos that I have already shot and edited. I try to have a bunch ahead of me just in case, something comes up and I can't do something next week or a couple of weeks or whatever. So there's going to be a bunch, probably, several weeks worth that are going to be edited the same way as in the past. So and things aren't going to change immediately, whatever the outcome of this is. But what I would say is that if I get an overwhelming desire for me not to edit so assiduously, then a couple months in the future, whatever it is, we'll see a difference. So anyway, those are the two questions I thought were of use to get to you guys, to a bigger audience. We'll try to do these from time to time, depending on what kind of questions I get and so on and so forth. But and if you like this kind of format, let me know again in the comments. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Obviously, this is an unusual video because I'm taking questions rather than sort of giving some discussion of Dharma. So if you find a discussion of Dharma more interesting, then check out some of the other videos on the channel. And meanwhile, I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks a lot for being here. Glad to have you.